Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. In a recent Taiwanese TV interview, President Lai Ching-te said if China's claims on Taiwan are about territorial integrity, then it should also take back land that Russia seized in the 19th century.
中国要攻打台湾、并吞台湾，不是因为台湾哪一个人、哪一个政党说了什么话、做什么事情，其实也不是为了领土的完整啊。
Instead, Lai said the real reason China wants to take Taiwan
那就是想要改变这个以规则为基础的世界秩序啊。他想要在国际上，西太平洋或在国际上，来成就他的霸权嘛。
Under the 1858 Treaty of Aigan and 1860 Treaty of Beijing, China's Qing Empire signed over to the Russian Empire land the size of modern Ukraine, Poland and Lithuania all put together. Of all the so-called unequal treaties forced on the Qing during what Beijing calls the Century of Humiliation, these two were the most unequal, in which China lost the most territory in its history. So, if territorial integrity doesn't apply to Russia, does it apply to Taiwan? And is Beijing justified in using the argument to legitimize current ownership of Taiwan and the taking of Taiwan by force? Joining us today are Taisis Chen, National Zhengzhou University Institute of International Relations Research Professor, and Chris Horton, Taiwan-based journalist. A very warm welcome to both of you on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
OK, so let's take a look at a map of land the Qing ceded to the Russian Empire. We can see here the land ceded in yellow under the 1858 Aigan Treaty was approximately 600,000 square kilometres. 2 years later, under the 1860 Treaty of Beijing, a further 400,000 square kilometres of land that you can see here in pink was designated as a Sino-Russian joint administration area east of the Ussuri River. However, this territory was later permanently ceded to Russia. Chris, let me come to you first. President Lai's comment, some media have distorted the point that President Lai was making. He wasn't urging China to invade Russia. What do you think was the president's message?
Well, I think it served, I think he had several aims. One was to drive a wedge between Russia and China, who are becoming closer all the time now, by bringing up this sensitive turn of events in the 19th century where China lost a lot of territory, and it really hampered the development of the Chinese Northeast. I think also it's another way of showing that maybe there's a new administration, a new tack, where there's maybe going to be a little more teeth to comments, whether they're aimed at China or at Russia.
And how about on the point of the consistency of China's narrative?
China's never really been known for consistency of narrative, but I mean, most countries haven't. But you know, when you look at, like, for instance, the treaty that China signed with the UK that brought back the Hong Kong and other territories ceded during the Qing. You know, that was very important to China, but you know, other treaties can be overlooked.
Okay, and Professor Chen, how about for you? Anything else that you read from the point that President was making?
I think if we pay attention to the context of President Lai's remarks, his speech, or his answer to the reporter's question, you will realize that the key point of his message was not actually so much focused on Sino-Russian relations or the ceded territory to Russia or Russian Empire, but rather on the contradictions or inconsistencies in China's territorial claims. So if the current PRC's claim to have inherited all the imperial territories from the past and refuse to relinquish any, then why insist that Taiwan is part of China, but not claim the lost territories in China's northeast, Manchuria as well? I think the focus still is on China's strategy today rather than in the past.
So basically, and what he was saying is there is no justification to take Taiwan.
Right. I believe that's President Lai's message, revealing that he believed that China's territorial claim regarding Taiwan, and also inherently maybe other territorial disputes in the Western Pacific, these claims have little to do with the so-called territorial integrity. Instead, it is about seeking dominance in this part of the world.
Yes, and he talked about international or Western Pacific hegemony. At the end of that quote that we did. Chris, the AIGN and Beijing treaties were part of, actually it was Sun Yat-sen that coined the term unequal treaties. And this was during a period from 1840 to around 1950. Can you tell us how they occurred?
Well, they began by the Qing falling apart. The Qing was weak, and I believe the 1858 Treaty of AIGN was a direct result of Tsarist Russia challenging the Qing and saying, look, we're going to take this if you don't just give it to us, and merely by threatening war, they got the Qing to sign it over. They weren't happy, of course, but they were dealing with the Taiping Rebellion at the time, so they had their hands full.
That was Russia that we've spoken about, but there was actually several Western powers, weren't there, that negotiated or forced upon Qing Empire these unequal treaties.
Yes, indeed. So one episode of war and a conflict led to another one, and the domestic conflicts got convoluted with external pressure, challenges, and the disputes and armed conflicts. So this is a layer upon layer of the so-called unequal treaties. And then,
but did it actually, was the root of all of this, was it the Opium War?
That was the first major episode of armed conflict between the West, which is the British Empire, and China, the Qing dynasty. So that's the beginning of these unequal treaties, or a century of humiliation era.
And we should also mention, of course, Taiwan was ceded to Japan in 1895, and that lasted for 50 years. So, Chris, a little bit further then, in today's era, though, what have those unequal treaties, what has a century of humiliation, what's it come to represent for the CCP or even for Xi Jinping personally?
Well, I don't know about Xi Jinping personally, but for the party, it's been a huge provider of legitimacy. So there's no elections, no one's ever voted Xi Jinping. No private citizens have ever voted Xi Jinping or the Communist Party into power. So they have to claim legitimacy through other means, and dredging up a century of tragedy and exploitation and war. It's a very good way to establish some sort of credibility. And the reality is that China did suffer quite a bit for that period of time. So it's not like there's nothing there to work with, but then you start getting into questions of like, okay, where do we draw the line? How far back do we want to go? Is the Qing Chinese? Questions like that. And they were Manchurian, and they brought together the biggest empire that had ever existed since the Mongolian Empire, and the ROC wanted to keep it together to whatever extent it could. The PRC is trying to revive it by incorporating Taiwan and other places, but there's still lots of places like Arunachal Pradesh, which China calls southern Tibet. But it's a state in India that's administered by India. That used to be claimed by the Qing.
Now, when Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping met in May 2023 in Beijing and declared a new era in the Russia-China relationship, one sentence in their joint statement covered discussions to allow China's access to the lower Tumen River and out to the sea. The Tumen River runs along a small section of land that joins China, Russia and North Korea, emptying out into the Sea of Japan. Professor Chen, let me come to you. Why is China eager to access the Tumen River, do you think? What is the major strategic gain?
I would say it's geoeconomic concerns or factors driving Chinese pursuit in this course of direction. This Tumen River access basically offers a shortcut to the Pacific Ocean and potentially can bolster regional economic integration with neighboring countries, North Korea and Japan and Russia. So opening up this river route would reduce China's reliance on the congested Bohai or Yellow Sea traffic.
And reduce the need to circumnavigate the peninsula.
And making it easier for China to access energy resources, export goods, enhance trade routes with Japan, Korea.
Okay, and Chris, but why is Japan so concerned? If this is about, opening up trade, that sounds an improvement, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Japan, I think, Japan has territorial issues with not just China, but also Russia. And so those two countries getting together and becoming closer and cooperating more militarily, obviously has Tokyo concerned. But, having the Tumen River suddenly with PLA Navy vessels, that changes the regional calculus quite a bit.
Yes, because Professor mentioned about it's actually access not just to the Sea of Japan, but to the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
So are we talking about essentially having another front or another point where it can break through perhaps the first island chain?
Quite possibly, but I think there's also, it's worth keeping Russian and North Korean interests in mind too. They want to keep a good relationship with China, but they don't want China to become too powerful in their neighborhood, too strong in their neighborhood. There's an old bridge it's low and it keeps most of the bigger vessels out of the river.
So that would have to be destroyed?
That would have to be destroyed and replaced with something a little bit taller, and the river would also have to be dredged heavily, which China can always pay for. But what does Russia get out of this? And I believe Russia last year just started letting China use the port at Vladivostok again after more than a century and a half of not.
Yeah. So does that point to, Professor, the changing stance of Russia, perhaps a softening? Chris mentioned, the reluctance of both North Korea and Russia to encourage perhaps more influence and power of China in the region. But do you sense that perhaps Russia is shifting on this? Perhaps Russia is softening and is more willing to partner with Beijing?
When we look at Manchuria or northwestern Pacific situation, we have to put that in a larger strategic landscape. So Russia currently is under heavy sanction because of its military operations in Ukraine. And in the same time, China is rivaling the U.S. in this part of the world, in Indo-Pacific. So these two countries become natural ally. They are forming this coalition of convenience or strategic partnership, whatever you call it, but they have common goal to counter Western influence, especially the U.S. Dominance or influence in this part of the world.
So what do you think Russia thinks of Chinese Navy vessels and even Coast Guards ships coming down the Tumen River, directly accessing Japan and the Pacific? Is that a benefit for Russia?
Well, I believe Russia can always control the traffic, the maritime traffic, along the Russian coastline. But if Moscow is willing, then it can allow Chinese vessels, especially People's Liberation Army Navy vessels, to tour these coastlines or even onward to a Sea of Japan. And that would make an apparent maneuver or a gesture of menace to Japan. And if you threaten Japan, you threaten or you challenge the position of the United States.
Yeah. Okay. Now, following President Lai's comments, Russia's foreign ministry pointed out that China and Russia had settled their border in 2004 and stressed that Moscow backs Beijing's claims over Taiwan. In 2004, under Hu Jintao's administration, China reclaimed Tarabarov Island at the juncture of the Amur and Ussuri rivers, as well as half of Bolshoi-Uruskiy Island, totaling 337 square kilometers of land, which was regarded as a national victory. In 2008, the two countries held a boundary marker unveiling ceremony on Bolshoi Island, finalizing the Sino-Russian border that stretches over 4,300 kilometers. Chris, let me quote to you what the Foreign Ministry spokesperson, that was Maria Zakharova, what she went on to say. She said, what some fringe politicians, I guess that's lie, obsessed with revanchism think about this, someone else can worry about, but we won't. Do you think that this is ironic, given Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its insistence that Ukraine has always been part of Russia?
Well, I think the Russian government, irony. What is irony to them? I mean, it's they can say that an invasion is a special military operation. They can say whatever they want, and yes, it is ironic. It is hypocritical, but. The fringe, the coordination on, or the increasing similarity between how Russia talks about Taiwan and how China has always spoken about Taiwan. It feels like the daylight is getting narrower. They're coming together and becoming more on message. So, calling the president of the ROC, which claims the old borders, basically the old Qing dynasty borders, calling it revanchist, in a way, in a topsy-turvy way, kind of makes sense. But I think when you look at the reaction to Lai's statement, not just the comments by the spokeswoman, but the cyber attacks that the Russian government initiated shortly after Lai's comments, that kind of suggests that maybe Lai hit a sore spot.
Yeah, Professor, when it comes to Taiwan, is this another case of obsession with revanchism, except that we're talking about Beijing, and can we also say it's revanchism using this as justification to say that force cannot be ruled out?
It's always selective revanchism. Taiwan is an easy target or easy prey to Beijing. It's much weaker compared to Russia or Japan or the U.S. So we are the easy target of revanchism, and so that's what I call it, selective target. And you don't see Beijing doing the same to Russia, or Korea or India even.
And sort of revisiting that land, the coastal land. That is now Russian territory. I mean, we saw from China's desire to access Tumen River, or the lower reaches of it, that this land is strategic, isn't it? Can you tell us a little bit more about that the value of that geostrategic land for China now, perhaps in today's era?
I think control this river or this land mass would give China a stronger foothold in the Sea of Japan. Where it currently has no direct access. Strategically, this is vital for its growing naval ambitions and influence in the region. The area surrounding the Tumen River is also crucial for regional security, as it borders North Korea and Russia, making it a very sensitive geopolitical zone area. China may view this access as a way to strengthen its regional influence in Northeast Asia and Northwestern Pacific.
Okay. Chris, let's go back to, whether you mentioned that for Russia it's a sore spot. You talked about the cyber attacks launched after Lai's comments. How worried do you think Russia is about this territory that used to belong to China, that was, ceded in an unequal treaty? How concerned do you think that Russia thinks that China might actually make a move on that land?
I doubt that they're concerned about anything happening anytime soon. But if you look at the history of Sino-Russian relations, sometimes they get along quite well, and other times they don't. They came close to nuclear war during the Cold War, and I think China's ambitions to swallow all of Mongolia were kept in check by the Soviets, who wanted a buffer state. And so I think it's, from a Russian perspective, it's just a matter of keeping things where China's dealing with other situations that are more pressing than that particular bit of geography. But I don't see any sort of fragmenting of the relationship between Putin and Xi at this point.
Right, right. And because interestingly, Professor, in 2023, the Chinese government released their new standard map, which I believe formally added the 1 dash, an extra dash to the 9 dash line. Now, in that, obviously people focus very much on Taiwan being within that 10 dash, but also it completely incorporated the Bolshoi Ussuriysky Island, not just half of it, but the entire island within Chinese territory. So there have been some rumors within Russia that, maybe China will take over Siberia in the Far East. In your view, how worried should Russia be?
Yes, I basically agree with Chris on that matter. I think rumor will be rumor, and there will always be rumors. But in general, this current dynamics between China and Russia make a direct Chinese territorial penetration or this territorial confrontation highly unlikely. Both countries, Russia and China, got their own issues, domestic issues, international issues they have to take care of. So their past or even current territorial issues in China's northeast, I would say, is not the top priority to both countries.
Chris, you mentioned about Outer Mongolia. Let's talk about sort of turn the focus to China in terms of, either invasions or unequal treaties. How about Tibet? Let's talk about Tibet. Let's talk about Xinjiang.
Wow.
Well, I mean, if there's like core historical China, Han China, which, if you look at the Qing and how big the Qing got, that core of, kind of southern China and central China, it really doesn't, it's a small part of what the Qing left behind. And, Tibet, Xinjiang, they were loosely controlled or ruled by the Qing, just like Taiwan was. And Taiwan was only, what was it, like the coastal regions, right? So about a third of the island was controlled administered by the Qing. So the Qing left a legacy of kind of loose connections to these outer territories, these outer kingdoms that the KMT and then later on the CCP exploited quite successfully.
Right, yeah. So, again, let me come back to Professor in terms of wrapping the show up. So we started off with the idea of unequal treaties. So on China's part, that it was unfair for this territory to be taken. And yet we have examples where China has taken territory itself. There was also actually the treaty between China, unequal treaty between China and Korea. That was, I believe, in the 19th century as well.
I think the point of President Lai Ching-te's remarks or his answer to the reporter's question is that Taiwan currently is not part of PRC, and the PRC has no territorial claim or legitimate or valid claim over Taiwan. I think that's his main message.
And do you think that he has a point that, we shouldn't be, as a world, going back through history to say, at this point in time, this country was part, or this territory was part of our country, and therefore it should be part of our territory now?
I think that's exactly his message. Just because we were a Chinese territory in the past, that does not mean we have to be a Chinese territory or under PRC administration.
Chris, I mean, the Roman Empire was massive. How would the world react if Italy began going round to the UK and saying, well, you are part of our territory because you used to be?
Right, or Mongolia. I mean, I think it was the Mongolian president tweeted when after Putin gave his history lesson at the beginning of the year and said, well, if you want to bring up history, take a look at our old empire, you know, but we're not bringing that up now. And so, yeah, I think, you know, at some point you have to agree to some sort of arrangement that everyone can be okay with. And China has plenty of land. It gets along with Taiwan in an economic way that's been beneficial to both sides. There's no reason that it has to be integrated into the Chinese territory. It's Taiwan is functioning just fine without China, and China is functioning fine without Taiwan.
So let's return back to perhaps Chris, the other point to Lai Ching-te's comments, which is it's not about territorial integrity. It's actually about hegemony. It's actually about China wanting to be the greatest power in the world.
Yeah, well, it's definitely wanting to be the greatest power in Asia, and you know, it's done a lot. It's shown its expansionist nature by taking over, you know, lots of territory in the South China Sea. It's now trying to push its control of the internal, you know, seas of the First Island chain right up to the coasts of all the countries, as you see, like is happening in the Philippines, also with Japan.
Okay. We're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Titus Chen and Chris Horton for joining Taiwan Talks today.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.